Sahana bhavatu, Sahana bhunaktu, Saha viryam karavavahe, Tejasvinavaditam astu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil or argue with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we have a question, three questions. It goes like this. Yesterday I mentioned I had some questions, all right? Can you say Nirodha is the exercise of removing the vritti of ignorance, and the instrument to do it is Chitta, the mind? So I'll answer that as we go on, but not exactly. We have to define some of these terms. And then I would like some insights into life after death. Wonderful. We have the same Vivekananda book. Apart from it, do you advise other books? Okay. I'm wondering about people who are suffering in a way that we can't even imagine. The only explanation is the karma from passing lives. Well, I think I will deal with the last one first, because as we listen to all the news around us, we can understand that many people are suffering. And many people also have suffered. In fact, everyone who is born suffers to a greater or lesser degree. And one of the difficulties about some approaches to the explanations of life is, why should they be suffering? It's sometimes called the problem of suffering. And we can't understand, in dualistic, theistic terms, how it is possible that somebody can indiscriminately suffer when we assume that there is a loving creator, extra cosmic God, who has our best interests at heart. There's an addendum, really, to the fundamental question about why is there suffering. The law of nature, which we deem to be constant, it runs on causality. We have a name for this, and that is called karma. And these technical terms, in my opinion, would be more easily understood if they were replaced by vernacular terms. Well, instead of saying karma, we can say sowing and reaping. We can say sowing and reaping, whatever you sow, you will reap. Now, there's a fundamental causal law, which has in mind more of a circular than a linear approach. And so, supposing there are waves in an ocean, the cause of a peak is due to a hollow, and the cause of the hollow is another peak, and it goes on indefinitely. And so we can see it is something to do with a cyclical pattern. There is a cycle of life, and we call this cycle samsara. Samsara, a kind of perpetual, ongoing series of events that keep repeating. And although it gives us a sense of déjà vu, we don't really know how to overcome it. We struggle desperately. And so everybody really wants to avoid pain. I don't know many exceptions, people who wish to sustain or even encourage pain. Most people would want to avoid it. And for this reason, much of the Upanishads is dedicated to relieving what is called grief. Now, grief is a very, very good English word which describes a certain type of pain which is psychological. Of course, we all understand physical pain. Physical pain is a necessary ingredient, and it comes along with a biological survival. Without pain, we cannot make a contrast. We cannot indicate any possibility of a solution of healing without this component of pain. But you see, the psychological suffering, emotional suffering, is very, very acute with everyone. It is very subtle. And the causes, when we investigate it, boil down really to one particular thing. That is a sense of individuality, that we are the actor and we are the one that profits. We can call it a profit-actor complex. So that when we act, then we expect a result, although we don't often pay attention to it. So we can't make an exemption for thought. Thought itself is what we call some activity going on within Chitta. What is Chitta? Well, we have to form an image of a lake. And the body of the lake would be called Chitta. The possibility of consciousness in which various waves called vrittis arise. Vrittis, vortexes, disturbances, things within the field of the Chitta. Overall, we can call it Chitta mind. And how to deal with these disturbances that are giving us pain. They're giving us a range of pleasure and pain, but ultimately it's painful. And our difficulty is that the approach to eliminate pain, which is the opposite, let us say in a generalized way called pleasure, is a self-defeating thing because it doesn't last. So in the example of waves and causality, well, we'll see that although we may characterize the peak of a wave as pleasure, we know that it's going to go down into varied pain, ranging from disappointment to uttermost despair. And if we look at it properly, we might see that it's something like a spiral. It has the effect of spiraling downwards. But equally, there's an independent agency which can say, well, let us stop that. Let us make it spiral upwards. And that independent entity is a deciding factor. Given a range of possibilities and choices, we can make a sound decision, and then we can implement it and translate it and transfer it to the world in which we live. But if we don't register that something is inherently, potentially even painful, then we won't even make any effort toward it, except the normal effort of immediately counteracting pain with introducing something which is pleasurable. And that pleasure can range from sense pleasure to occupation in the mind, a pleasure to do with diverting the mind toward maybe even cultural interests or even entertainment. People often inquire why there seems to be a decline in the Western world, America, Europe, a decline of an interest in religion or spirituality. Well, my analysis would say that it is because we have an abundance of entertainment. In other words, we have sufficient in our modern day realm of technology to divert our attention to something that we have interpreted as much more interesting. But all of this obscures the fact that pain is there. So there's a fundamental principle in the whole of the Vedanta philosophy about these two interlinked questions, and that is what happens after death. In other words, what is the consequence of karma? Is there a rebirth? And the subject of karma, is it simply a doctrine? Well, yes, we can characterize it as a doctrine. The doctrine of karma and rebirth, it forms an important part of our Upanishadic teachings. And when we say we are teaching Vedanta, then it all comes from these Upanishads. Are there any books? Yes, the fundamental books on all these subjects are found in the Upanishads. It is the Upanishads we should take up with the help of a competent teacher and study thoroughly. Not only the help of a competent teacher, but with the help of other teachers who've given commentaries, and also in terms of understanding the basis of scripture, that it has to be reflected on. It has to be reflected on, it has to be heard, it has to be read and heard, same thing these days, and then reflected on, and then finally nididhyasana, meditated upon. The Upanishadic teachings, they've exerted the greatest practical influence upon Hindu society up to the present time. And even beyond that, we are spreading the message of the Vedanta everywhere through the Upanishads. So to study the Upanishads is vital to understanding everything. So it's one of the strong pillars on which Hindu dharma or law rests, is this question of karma. And it was formulated in response to a question: what becomes of a person after death? This is just your other question. What becomes of a person after death? And it's also explained for the Hindus the inequality between man and man at the time of birth. So it explains now the answer to the question about suffering, the great dilemma of how can you solve this problem of suffering. So at the time of birth, it looks as if, empirically speaking, people are born different in different circumstances. Some born into poverty, others born into wealth, some born into misery, dire misery, some born in to a reasonable way of living, but by the age of maybe a few months or something, their life ends. We witnessed this on the international stage recently. So how can we solve this problem? We have to have some kind of formula which deals with these questions and gives them a reason to believe in any moral foundation for the entire universe. A moral foundation in which virtue is, in the long run, rewarded, and inequality or iniquity, evil, is punished. And the doctrine of karma and rebirth is actually really the original contribution of the Vedanta philosophy. It supplies a philosophical thought to the world. It must be clearly understood that this doctrine cannot be applied to the soul or the Atman. And one question given maybe a few days ago was, can you explain to me what is the difference between Brahman, Atman, Purusha? But you see, fundamental to all existence and fundamental to your own personal existence will be this thing that we can call soul or spirit or Atman. Simply the self that is beyond all the other variabilities and variations that we call life. It doesn't change. Other things that we observe change. It remains constant. It isn't born. It doesn't die. It doesn't have any of those characteristics that fall within the scope of objects and objectivity. Our true nature is this. This is our fundamental starting point when we deal with any question. The fundamental thing is, I, at the fundamental level, even if I may not feel it, I am the Atman. That is my true nature. I'm beyond birth and I'm beyond death. So when you ask, do you believe in rebirth? My standard answer, as many people know, no, I don't believe in this birth, because what we experience as this birth has nothing to do with the Atman. And what we call birth and life and death is a changing phenomena that has no permanence within it, like a movie that we go in to watch and we come out, and that's the end of the movie. Now, most people want to go back and see the same movie again, maybe with a little bit more understanding. Having seen the movie once, we know roughly, after so many years, of not seeing it, we can go back and we roughly remember what the storyline is. So we go back in with a certain degree of knowledge, but we're watching the same movie, the same chain of events. Now, here's the interesting thing. The chain of events is invented by us. This is something that we have to understand. This Atman is beyond birth, death. It's unaffected by time, unaffected by space, unaffected by the law of causation that we call karma. And it has reference only to the jiva, or embodied soul. Jiva means this Atman when associated with the prophet-actor complex that we call I overall, comprising the body, mind, and all the accumulation of our experience. But you see, this time-space causation world, all of it and knowledge about it is called inferior knowledge. It's called aparavidya. Why is it inferior knowledge? Because it doesn't solve any problems. It simply goes round and round and round. And there may be some learnings within it, but the real learnings come when some acute or astute thing catches us and it leads us to a certain, aha, I am that. I am the fundamental nature. My quintessence is there. And that realization is called superior knowledge, paravidya. Aparavidya explains the relative world, and it's not the superior knowledge. The superior knowledge is really described as the science of the self. Bhagavad Gita says, of all the sciences, I am the science of the self or the Atman. So this word karma comes from a root kr, to act, to do. It literally means action. And of course, it denotes both action in general and also its results. You can say in the phraseology of sowing and reaping that it is the fruit of all our actions. And the fruit is in the form of subtle impressions. These subtle impressions remain with the doer even after an action is outwardly accomplished. It still reverberates in the unconscious mind. A question, maybe yesterday, might have been about samskaras, or maybe it was Sunday, I never really remember. And so, what is samskaras? Samskaras are these subtle mental impressions that are imprinted automatically. An immediate copy is taken, and of all thoughts and all activities. And is there really any difference? Well, all activities are driven by thought. Other than those that have already been imprinted on the habit level, we call that somehow instinct. So it is this that this sense that we live with in these impressions, and they play an active role, an important role in molding our own future. And not only here on the planet Earth, with all the familiar surroundings that we have, but also after death as well. It carries on. This is a law. You cannot make this law linear. It has to be circular. And so the law of karma is the application of the law of cause and effect in this moral world. No action is ever exhausted without producing its effect. And this is both on the body and also on the mind. Because there's no distinction between body and mind. We learn this very explicitly in the lectures on Raja Yoga that Swami Vivekananda gives, pointing out that the only difference between mind and matter is one of subtlety. Matter is gross mind, and mind is subtle matter. So every person is born in the world fashioned by who? Your world is fashioned by yourself. Not by anything else, not by fatalism, not by a cruel joke against you, not by a malicious creator God, nothing like this. It's caused simply by you. You put your order in, and the cosmic Amazon delivered it at your door. So when we talk about life with its happiness, with its suffering, these ups and downs, these variegation of advance and retreat, of plus and minus, of ups and downs, of disappointments and joys. All of these are really the inevitable consequence of the actions of previous lives or previous moments. And these actions that are performed in this life, they determine those of the next life, just as this moment determines the next second and the next second. So this conviction has taught the ancient people, the Hindus anyway, to regard pain of this life as self-inflicted, not externally inflicted, and to accept it with, therefore, calmness and resignation. I think that's a better formula for dealing with it, rather than dealing with it with anxiety. And it's also an incentive for us to conduct the right way of behavior, because if a person sins no more in this life, then he will be spared grievous suffering in future existence, and that's something we want to avoid. And so a person is free. We are all free. All of us are free to accelerate or hinder our evolution. And don't forget, previously, I characterized evolution as an unfolding of something, and what's stopping this unfolding? So neither a person's growth nor his action is determined by any outside factor. That's an important thing to know. And you might say through the law of karma, the Vedic seers try to explain the moral foundation of the universe, according to which those who are good get rewarded, those who are wicked get punished. It's not that require a separate province, a heaven or a hell to do it, but in the Hindu view, heaven and hell, many heavens, many hells. In my father's house, there are many mansions. They are there. And classically, we might say 7 realms of heaven. And we might say, well, some of it is the earth. So 7 universes or 7 parallel dimensions, if you will. And the other way as well, 7 regressive dimensions or 7 hells, if you will. So it's a necessary component in all of these things. And the theory, therefore, of rebirth, which I prefer to use as opposed to, well, reincarnation is a term, but we could also say transmigration, is the necessary counterpart of the law of karma and also the immortality of the soul. This soul or this Atman being eternal, it can't be finished off with. It cannot be annihilated. It can't be done away with the death of the body. So the idea of eternal reward and eternal punishment after death didn't appeal to the minds of these people. And it's disproportionate to the law of cause and effect to imagine that the actions of a short span of life, only a one-off, makes you liable to error, where you're liable to error, no doubt, where your things are imperfect, that this should bear fruit that will last for eternity seems enormously unjust. The idea that the erring soul should not be given another chance to rectify its mistakes, it seems both unjust and unmerciful to those seers of the Vedas. And so these great mystics, those who explored their inner life or their inner realms and got a revelation from it, These Vedic mystics, they often speak of the four courses that we may follow after death. And they're determined by your own actions and your thoughts while here with this body, you might say, on this earth. So firstly, the very highly developed souls who lead an extremely good life, virtuous life, righteous life, who meditate and with wholehearted devotion on the supreme principle, which we call Brahman, and practice the various spiritual disciplines, but who fall a little short of the mark, who don't succeed in attaining the complete self-knowledge, that self-realization that we characterize as freedom. They don't get their full freedom, therefore. There are some who get this before death, but those who don't, what happens to them? They go to a realm that is called Brahma Loka. Loka, a place where Brahma, cosmic mind, cosmic consciousness, personal God. This corresponds, of course, to the heaven of, let's say, Christians. And from there, in due course, they attain liberation. They go from this world of Brahma and continue, and ultimately they get their freedom. Another way of looking at it is having gone into this cosmic mind, this cosmic consciousness, this great, great personal deity in the highest heaven, if you will, naturally it finally goes into its causal element, which is Prakriti, nature itself, and finally it goes into its causal element in this case, and that is to Brahman himself, what we here call self-realization. So they go up there for the on a course of freedom, but some, however, some of them will return to earth, and then this journey lies through a path known as Devayana, or a way of the deities. And second class of people will be the ritualists and the philanthropists, those people who are basically good, who are essentially religious in a good sense of the word, and who cherish a desire for the fruit of their actions. In other words, let me get some merit from all the good things I'm doing. Well, after death, they go to what is called Chandraloka. Chandraloka, Chandra meaning the moon, the place of the moon. Now, we all know it cannot literally be the spheroid that we call, or the spherical thing that we call moon. Not at all. But we can call it maybe the lunar sphere. And that journey lies through the path which is known as Pitrayana, Pitra, ancestors, the path of the ancestors, or the way of the fathers. Pitra, father. The Latin comes pater, you see, or paternal. And after enjoying then immense happiness in the holiday camp that you created, that you saved up for, and then enjoyed, naturally, once all your rewards are spent, then your meritorious actions have been paid off. These people come back to earth since they still really cherish desire for worldly happiness. So you can see that the driving force is desire. And you can even say this is the driving force of what we call evolution. In a simple way, and many people may disagree with this characterization, an animal looking at leaves at the top of the tree and realizing this is a non-competitive area develops a long neck, and we call it a giraffe, and passes that on to the next generation. So since there is a desire, even a small desire for worldly happiness, they will spend their merit and come back again. And during that period of time, there's no karma that takes place. There's only the enjoyment of the fruits of it. And then thirdly, there are those people who perform actions which are really taboo. They're really forbidden by normal standards that come out in religion, morals, ethics. And after death, they assume subhuman bodies, and they dwell in what is generally known as hell. So we don't deny hell. The beauty about the system is we don't deny anything. We don't say there's no hell. We say, yes, but there's more, and it has no relation to the fundamental unity of existence within you that is called Atman. And then, of course, these people, after expiating their evil actions, they're then reborn on earth as human beings. And then lastly, or fourthly, there are those people who perform extremely evil actions, absolute outright evil actions. What do we characterize as evil? Those where the ego dominates so much that they really have no vestige of compassion for anyone. Well, they'll spend many births as insignificant creatures, maybe mosquitoes, fleas, etc. Somebody asked me, what is the use of mosquitoes? Doesn't seem to be much use except to annoy you, buzz around your head, and bite you. Well, it's because, you see, the use of them is the effect of evil actions has to manifest somewhere, and it happens to be with them. If you squash a mosquito, well, maybe you are liberating the soul for a higher birth, who knows? But these creatures in the long run, they also return, in the very long run, they'll also return to human bodies on earth. So, these are the four courses of action, and they obviously don't apply to the fortunate soul. And there we come to the fifth type. And the fifth type attains the knowledge of Brahman in this body before and at the time of death. Your freedom is accessible here. It is accessible now. A cave that has been dark for 1,000 years, says Ramakrishna, how long does it take to light? You simply strike a match and the whole thing is lit up and transformed. So we have the possibility of transforming here and now, but it depends on the level of intensity. What do we mean by that? It means it depends on how we are able to calm the vrittis, all these whirlpools in the mind, in the chitta. And how do we do that? In a way, we do it through chitta itself, yes, but actually we make use of the waves within the chitta in order to neutralize the other waves. We put it more simply, whenever a negative arises, we put in double the positives. We put in more positives than negatives. What do we mean by positives? Things which do not bear any pain for us, things which are delightful, things which are full of generosity and joy, things, in short, that have no egocentric characteristic in them, no semblance of selfishness. You can understand how miserable a person is if they are self-centered, if they are mean, if they are angry, if they are jealous, if there's pride in it. You can immediately see the internal suffering that a person goes through. You have the saying that jealousy eats a person up. Yes, it's a consumer. And so, for this person who becomes Jivan Mukta, as we say, there's no coming, there's no going. It can't even be imagined, because that person is absorbed in Brahman. And the sojourn of the soul in a body superior or inferior to a man's is temporary, being of the nature of a reward or punishment. But the actions performed by creatures through these bodies, they don't produce any results like those performed in a human body. Because a crocodile doesn't evaluate things in terms of good or evil, it just behaves according to its own primitive nature. But when the soul again assumes a human body, and you can only get this moksha through this human body, not even through the body of a deva, a divine being, an administrative entity in a subtle realm. No, you have to be reborn again as a human. So, all of these things, when the soul resumes this human body once more, it takes up the thread of spiritual evolution again. And this, of course, was suspended while they reap the rewards or the punishment, as you will, of their time after death. But as the attainment of perfection is not possible in one life alone, well, it's possible theoretically, but unlikely. And as the attainment is like that, then the soul therefore assumes many bodies to attain it. Now, many bodies depends on your positivity or otherwise. We don't count how many to go, and we don't count how many have been. We simply tune in to the here and now. And this is then the promotion of what we call sattva. Hindu philosophers will also divide a person's karma into three portions. What is called sanchita, what is called sanchita, that is agami is another way, and prarabdha. And so we can compare it, or we can use the analogy of stringing a bow with arrows in a quiver. And of course, once you shoot the arrow, you cannot bring it back. Because of the law of entropy, there's no reverse on your arrow. So this sanchita karma, this is the vast store of accumulative works that have been done in the past. And the effects or the fruits of these haven't yet been reaped by you. And then the agami or agami karma is the action that will be performed by the individual in the future. That's up to you. But the prarabdha karma is that action which has begun to bear fruit in your life, the fruit of which is being reaped here. And the prarabdha is part of the sanchita karma, you may realize, since this also is action done in the past. The difference between these two, sanchita and prarabdha, is that whereas the sanchita karma is not yet in operation, the prarabdha has already begun. And your style of birth, your birth that you're living with here and now, is because it is the result of the fruits of this prarabdha karma that is driven by a desire primarily. And desire is driven by thought. So what will we do in the context of this yoga psychology that we were mentioning yesterday? We have to, at every opportunity, promote a vritti, a kind of a wave that is not disturbing and yet harmonizes and balances all the other waves. Now, this is clearly told in the Yoga Sutras, where the method is to introduce a counter wave. Whenever one wave comes, which is intrinsically against us, it is negative, is egocentric, we immediately bring up our chosen wave of truth and goodness, of brilliance and joy, until ultimately all the samskaras have all settled in the unconscious area, and our habit is changed to golden generosity, a realm of golden joy. That would be our aim. The fruit of all these actions must be reaped in the process of sowing and reaping. And it must be reaped by the individual themselves. And the character and circumstances of a person's life are really determined by this prarabdha karma. So now, in the Bhagavad Gita, this prarabdha karma is characterized as guna, something we bring across in this birth. But you see, what is the future is determined by the other aspect, which is called karma, our reaction as it is to circumstances, and our capacity to change it. The attainment of moksha or self-knowledge can enable you to abstain from future fruit-bearing action, what is called agami karma, the thing which is to come, or to avoid the consequences of the accumulated action. There's not yet begun to operate, there's sanchita karma. But you see, the prarabdha karma, which has begun to bear fruit, must be reaped. Now, there was one of the monks, a very famous monk, Swami Purnananda, and he had sores all over his body. And somebody asked him, said, you live such a holy life and so on, but why do you have to endure all this? He says, no, I'm happy because this is my prarabdha karma that is being exhausted. And once it's exhausted, I'm free. Get rid of it. Don't save it up for the future. And so the person endowed with the self-knowledge actually might not suffer from the result of these actions because they're detached from the body and the sense organs, as in the case that I was mentioning. So this explains a little bit about why karma is there as a law, how it solves these two problems, the problem of the injustice of circumstances when one is born. But there are some other things as well. And this is why we repeat Shanti 3 times. First time is, please bring peace to me, that is brought about, or disturbance of it is brought about by my own actions, my own thoughts. And then the second is repeated because you need to give me peace, or the possibility of the disturbance of peace. You need to protect me from others who will disturb my peace. And then thirdly, life is up and down. Life is full of irregularities. Life runs on the law of chaos as well as regularity. And so we have to be stable in character, sufficient to deal with all the unexpected things that come our way. And that helps us to evaluate things or reevaluate things in a proper context, knowing that actually there's only one being there without a second. Now let us try and tackle. So in terms of books, Upanishads, let us try to tackle, and of course, Gospel of Ramakrishna. Now, I sometimes hesitate to recommend such a book. Gospel of Ramakrishna, Gospel of Holy Mother, all of these are really scriptures because there's nothing that disagrees within them with the Upanishads, number one, but number two, they're full of contemporary practical wisdom. Why do I hesitate? Because it is not for me to promote certain individuals or personalities, no matter how saintly they are. But nonetheless, since you asked the question, I have to answer. These are books I recommend. But let us take this very first sutra that is being referred to in the first question. And why is that important? It's important because, as I mentioned previously, this first, or second, I should say, aphorism, sutra, gives one of the biggest misunderstandings. You see, if you restrain the mind stuff that is called chitta, taking various forms of the vrittis, then You might make an argument for blanking the activity off completely, stopping all activity. Restraining being interpreted as, let me stop every thought that arises in the mind. Let me take all the reactivity of the mind away. But that really results in a state of morbidness. And so that state will induce sleep. The most morbid state that we have will be sleep, a torpidity which is there, where nothing is happening. You know, you look and you have a blank look on your face. What are you thinking? Nothing. Well, the mind is not designed to think of nothing. Something will be, even fleetingly, going through the mind. And the nothingness that we are saying or talking about is really the mind wandering about between this and that and the other, with probably no connectivity between one thought and the next. Just allowed to remain wandering. That means in a scattered condition. But we don't want a scattered condition in the mind. In order for revelation to happen, and the mind is the only thing that we can address to create the settlement that has inherent within it a revealing aspect. The mind itself is the revealer. So to suppress the mind and to suppress its activity will not work. What will work? We have to bring up counter waves. For every wave that comes up in the mental field, evaluate it either characterized by egoistic activity, where we want the fruits of our actions, characterized, if you will, by desire. But even torpidity, laziness, dullness is characterized by desire, a desire to be left alone, a desire to withdraw, to get away from all these things. So we don't want to induce that state. Even if you are repeating a mantra in your spiritual practice, if you don't insert some meaning into it, some feeling into it, then the mind will just go to sleep. You know, there's an old remedy for insomnia, counting sheep. Depending where you are in the world and how many sheep there are. In Ireland, there are plenty of sheep, so you can do it. So counting sheep, the sheer monotony of the exercise will put you to sleep. So meditation is a highly active state. Meditation is a high state of concentration, and that serves to clarify the mind, to distill things in such a way that the revelation comes from within, by itself, unasked. It's there. When you clear away all the dross, when you take away all the weeds, when you polish the mind through promoting noble thoughts, then it has the effect of purifying the mind and making it illumined. It becomes then an illuminator. Now, in the Swami Vivekananda's commentary on this particular sutra, and the commentary spans several pages, because he wants to tell us about the geography of the mind. He wants to tell us about these three evolutionary thought forces. He wants to tell us that thought is a force, as is gravitation or repulsion. He wants to tell us that, if you use the analogy of the lake, the bottom of a lake we cannot normally see because its surface is covered with ripples. It's only possible for us to catch a glimpse of the bottom when, under these conditions, the ripples have subsided and the water is calm. But we don't do it by annihilating ripples. If the water is muddy or is agitated all the time, the bottom will not be seen. And if you don't do anything about it, the mud will settle and the visibility will be even denser. So if the water is muddy or is agitated all the time, the bottom will not be seen. The analogy says that the muddiness in the water we call tamas, and the agitation in the water we call rajas. The bottom of the lake is our own true self, says Swami Vivekananda. The lake is the chitta, and the waves are the vrittis. And again, the mind is in three states, he says. Darkness, called tamas, found in brutes and idiots. Why? Because idiots are people who don't think. And brutes are people who react in order to sustain their status quo as idiots. So tamas only serves to injure. No other idea comes to that state of mind. And then there is the active state of the mind, which is called rajas, whose chief motives are two things: Aishwarya and Bhoga, that is power and enjoyment. When you analyze it, power and enjoyment, when you see what are all the difficulties and troubles throughout the world, it is due to these two factors: a wish to gain and exert and dominate of power, and a wish to engender enjoyment. I mentioned all this also in terms of why people are not turning, or why religion, spirituality, all these things no longer appeal to people in Europe and so on, and mainly amongst the youth, because they have learned to have a scattered mind. They have learned that enjoyment in the mind is through the technology that we have. Multisensory technology seems to be much, much more valuable than the deeper things, not realizing that in your innermost depths is the highest ecstatic bliss available, and your desire for enjoyment stems from it. So people assert, I'll be powerful, I'll rule over others, I will dominate the position. One thing, a huge ego, and this comes about in varying ways. But each way is there to dominate and assert their own sense of self-image and importance. And then there's the state called sattva, in contrast to those other two. Its characteristics will be serenity, calmness, in which the waves cease and the water of the mind lake becomes clear. It's not inactive, but rather intensely active. Intensely active. And it's the greatest manifestation of power to be calm. It's easy, of course, to be active, but to be still, to be silent, to sit in stillness. You know, we do that exercise during meditation workshops and retreats. I enter into the room, people are gathered there, and generally the retreats will be silent retreats. And I don't say a word, and nobody says a word, they're not allowed to. And then it's a kind of test for how long will people be prepared to sit in silence. We try it out. Visit a friend and sit in silence. And then be aware of the awkwardness that both of you may feel. Nobody is used to silence, particularly in this world of multisensory perception and technology. There has to be a noise all around us. But in this silence, in this stillness, there we will find the infinite invisible, your own true nature, the kingdom of heaven within you. So it's easy to be active, but to let the reins go, in the analogy of a chariot with its horses, and the horses will run away with you. Anyone can do that. But the person who can stop the plunging horses is the strong person. And that requires the greatest strength, or which requires even the greatest strength. Is it letting go or restraining? And so this Nirodha is restraint, not by suppression, not by repression, but by catching hold of the will and directing it like the reins on a horse. And so the calm man or the woman, the calm person, is not the person who is dull. And he's making this comment in relation to the possible misunderstanding of this sutra. You must not mistake, he says, sattva for dullness or laziness. The calm person is the one who has control over the mind waves, and there it is. Activity is the manifestation of inferior strength and calmness of the superior. And the chitta is always trying to get back to its natural pure state. Chitta, the mind stuff. Chitta comes from chitta, consciousness. And so it's an area, it's a realm, it's a field of consciousness. It is always trying to get back to its pristine subjective consciousness itself. That is its pure state. But you see, the organs are drawing it out. And so to restrain it, to check the outward tendency, and to start it on the return journey to the essence of intelligence, that's the first step. And that's the first step in yoga, and we call it yama. So what is yama? What is its purpose? What is its use? Yama means control. It is to control these waves. How will we do it? We'll do it progressively by cultivating virtues. First virtue will be ahimsa, non-injury. On the other side, love. We can stop there. Because actually, if we do that, all the other things really fall into place. If we see the divine self in all beings and all beings in the self, this is a primary instruction in all the Upanishads, then what will be the consequence? Will we not be loving people? Will we not automatically be filled with the highest, noblest values? So the first step in yoga is that, because it's only in this way that the chitta can get into its proper course. So the instrument to do it is chitta, the mind, yes, in a sense. But really it is to steer that consciousness back to its origin by making it pure, by promoting the waves which are conducive to clarifying and calming this area, this mental field that we call chitta. And when we do that, the mind stuff can take the form of the intellect. It's not possible for it to return through all these steps and liberate the soul. Now, Vivekananda says, immediate salvation, we can say freedom also, is impossible for the cow or the dog. Because although they have a mind, because their chitta cannot as yet take the form that we call the intellect. So you can imagine a mental field that takes different forms, shapes itself into different forms. Intellect, mind, ego is part of that as well. The internal sense organs, and even the outside sense organs, which we call the body as well. And it manifests in the various forms. Scattering is a form, darkening is a form, gathering is a form, but one pointed is a form, concentrated is a form. And the scattering form is activity. Most of our mental activity is in this realm. But its tendency is to manifest in the form of pleasure or of pain. And the darkening form is dullness, which tends to injury. And the commentator on the various sutras, and this sutra in particular, will tell us that the third form, this is natural to these beings which are called the devas and the angels, but the first and second are really for the demons, that is the scattered mind and the mind of darkness. And you can see how that works. And the gathering form is when it struggles to center itself. We start gathering and struggling to center the mind. And the one pointed form tries to concentrate. The concentrated form is what brings the highest realization that we call samadhi. In this case, it's also called concentration. The ultimate concentration to the point where it's a singularity. There's no difference between subject and object. And the third sutra is very telling that at that time, that is the time of concentration, the seer, that is the Purusha, rests in its own unmodified state. So I think that's been dealt with quite comprehensively, and we've run out of time also. So if you have any other questions, you can push them over to another time. So with that, I leave you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Om